Two stories, one man. For some, Jesus was crucified, died on the cross, and rose on the third day. For others, he was neither killed nor crucified, but raised beyond their reach. Both claims look back at the same events, but interpret what followed very differently. If a story is true, its details eventually agree. In this video, AI compares the Bible's gospel accounts line by line, not to argue belief, but to see whether the details actually confirm that Jesus died on the cross. Before anything is examined, one thing must be clear. This investigation begins with documents, not doctrine. The story of Jesus' death and resurrection comes from 4 official accounts preserved in the Bible. They are known as the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They describe the same final days of Jesus' life, but they do not describe them in exactly the same way. These 4 texts form the entire foundation of the Christian claim that Jesus died and rose again. No Roman report describes the execution in detail. No Jewish court record survives. Everything begins and must be tested here. In the early 1st century, Judea was under Roman occupation. Political authority belonged to Rome, while religious authority rested with local leaders. Into this world came a Jewish teacher from a small town called Nazareth. His name was Jesus. According to the Gospel accounts, Jesus taught publicly, challenged hypocrisy, and attracted followers. His message drew attention and resistance. As Jerusalem filled with pilgrims for a major religious festival, tensions rose and opposition hardened. Jesus was arrested at night, questioned by religious authorities, and brought before the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. The charge was not theology. Rome did not execute people for belief. It executed people for perceived unrest and political threat. Pilate authorized crucifixion, a public Roman execution. Jesus was taken outside the city to a place called Golgotha and placed on a cross. Crowds gathered. Roman soldiers stood watch. Religious leaders observed. At some point that day, it was reported that Jesus had died. Because Jewish law required bodies to be removed before sunset, his body was taken down and placed in a tomb carved into rock. A large stone was rolled across the entrance. This is where the recorded event ends. What follows is interpretation. According to these same gospel accounts, the tomb was found empty on the 3rd day. Some said the body had been moved. Others said it had been taken. Jesus' followers said something else. They claimed he was alive again. They said they saw him, spoke with him, and even ate with him. From this moment onward, the story divides. One interpretation says death was followed by resurrection. Another says death never fully occurred. Both interpretations point back to the same days, the same city, the same tomb. What differs is the conclusion drawn from the details. This is where AI enters as a tool, not to decide belief, but to compare the texts carefully, line by line. When historians test ancient events, they look for agreement on timing, sequence, and central actions. Minor differences are expected, major ones are not ignored. When the 4 gospel accounts are compared, something becomes clear. They do not agree on key points surrounding the crucifixion. they do not agree on when the crucifixion occurred. In one gospel, Jesus is crucified early in the morning. In another, at that same hour, he's still standing before the Roman governor. One account says Jesus carried the cross himself. Others say a bystander, Simon of Cyrene, was forced to carry it for him. Some accounts place the women watching from a distance. Another places them close enough to hear his final words. These are not stylistic variations. They concern timing, presence, and sequence, the very elements used to confirm historical events. If these were four witnesses in a courtroom, their testimony would not be dismissed, but it would be examined closely, precisely because of these inconsistencies. If we cannot align when death was said to occur, how certain can we be that death was ever confirmed at all? The execution of Jesus did not end at the cross. It ended with a decision made by a Roman governor. His name was Pontius Pilate. Pilate was not a follower of Jesus. He had no interest in theology or prophecy. His responsibility was order under Roman law. Crucifixion was one of Rome's most effective punishments. It was designed to be slow. Victims were left suspended until their strength failed, sometimes over many hours, sometimes over days. Death was expected, but not quickly. That is why the next moment matters. When Joseph of Arimathea came to request Jesus' body, Pontius Pilate did not respond automatically. According to the Gospel of Mark, he hesitated. Roman governors did not normally question reports of death. They did so only when the timing itself appeared unusual. Pilate was surprised. He summoned the centurion in charge of the execution and asked a direct procedural question. Was Jesus already dead? This reaction is not emotional or symbolic. It is administrative and procedural. After the centurion confirmed the report, Pilate released the body. There was little time. Jewish law required that bodies be removed before sunset. The Sabbath was approaching and the window was closing. Under normal Roman practice, there was a final step used to ensure death. The legs of the condemned were broken, preventing the body from lifting itself to breathe. Once this step was applied, survival was no longer possible. According to the Gospel accounts, this was done to the two men crucified alongside Jesus. It was not done to Jesus. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced his side. This detail appears in only one Gospel account and is described briefly. No other Gospel independently confirms this final act. Blood and water are said to have flowed. No further examination is recorded, no prolonged observation, no delay. The body was taken down. Joseph of Arimathea assumed responsibility. Together they wrapped the body and placed it in a nearby tomb carved into rock. One Gospel account adds an unusual detail: a very large quantity of myrrh and aloes, estimated at over 30 kilograms, brought to the tomb, substances known not only for burial, but also for medicinal use, including treatment and preservation. A heavy stone was rolled across the entrance. From the outside, the sequence appeared complete. But when the events are followed carefully and in order, questions emerge. A death reported sooner than expected. A standard Roman procedure not applied. A body released quickly under pressure of time. A body treated with an unusually large quantity of aromatic substances. None of these details proves anything by itself. but taken together they introduce uncertainty at the very moment certainty is later assumed. Because if death was not as clear as later tradition claims, then what happens next cannot be dismissed so easily. And what happens next looks far less like death than expected. Before any conclusion is accepted, the sequence itself will have to be reconstructed carefully. According to the Gospel accounts, the story does not end at the sealed tomb. Early on the third day, the tomb is found open. The stone has been moved. The body is gone. The first reactions are not celebration. They are confusion. Some believe the body has been taken. Others assume it has been moved. At this point, no one speaks of resurrection. That explanation comes later. What follows is a series of encounters recorded across the 4 Gospel accounts. Jesus is seen again, not in one place, not by everyone, and not always recognized immediately. But the accounts agree on how these encounters unfold. Jesus is not described as a vision. He speaks, he walks, he appears close enough to be examined. In one account, the disciples are gathered behind closed doors, fearful and uncertain. When Jesus appears among them, their reaction is not relief, it is fear. They believe they are seeing a spirit. Jesus addresses that fear directly. He invites them to look closely, to examine what is in front of them. He draws attention to his hands and his feet and makes a specific point. A spirit does not have flesh and bones. The statement is deliberate. Even then, disbelief remains. So Jesus asks for something to eat. Food is brought to him. He eats in their presence. The detail is repeated for emphasis. The figure they are encountering is presented as physical, tangible, bodily. Later, another disciple insists on verification. He wants to see the wounds himself. He is invited to examine them. Again, the encounter is described not as a mystical experience, but as contact. Yet there is restraint in these accounts. Jesus does not return to public teaching. He does not appear before crowds. In John's account, Jesus says, "I have not yet ascended," marking the sequence as still unfolding rather than complete. The appearances are limited, private, and brief, and then they stop. What remains is testimony from those who are convinced they encountered him alive. But the manner of these encounters creates tension in the narrative. If this is resurrection, it is not portrayed as a departure from physical life. If it is survival, it is not portrayed as a simple return to ordinary life. The text occupies an uncomfortable middle ground, physical enough to touch, present enough to eat, yet absent from public life, removed from open display. It looks unresolved. At this point, the record leaves no neutral ground. The encounters described after the empty tomb demand an explanation. One explanation is the traditional Christian understanding. According to this view, Jesus died on the cross and was raised from the dead by God. The appearances that follow are resurrection. Death is overcome. Life is restored. The physical details, being seen, touched, and even eating, are understood as features of a transformed body, no longer bound by ordinary limitations. But the same texts also allow another reading. Taken at face value, the encounters describe a man who is physically present. When he appears, he is mistaken for a spirit. This reaction shows that the disciples believed he was dead. The narrative then shows Jesus responding directly to that fear. He denies being a spirit. He invites inspection. He shows his wounds, and when doubt remains, he asks for food and eats in front of them. The sequence is deliberate. Eating is not presented as celebration or ritual. It functions as a response to a specific claim that what they are seeing is not physically real. At precisely the moment the text could have emphasized heavenly glory, it instead emphasizes physical proof. These are the actions of a living body. At one point, Jesus himself offers a frame for how this should be understood. He compares his fate to Jonah, a man who was assumed dead after being swallowed by a great fish, yet who prayed and was delivered alive through direct divine intervention. A later New Testament text echoes the same pattern. It says that while Jesus was still in his earthly human life, he prayed with cries and tears to the one able to save him from death, and that his prayer was heard. In both cases, the pattern described is deliverance from death, not return after confirmed death. At the same time, his behavior is restrained. He does not return to public life. He avoids crowds. He appears briefly, then withdraws from the scene. This reading does not describe triumph over death, but survival followed by disappearance. It does not deny divine action, but it does not require that death was completed. Both explanations arise from the same accounts. The difference is not in what the texts describe, but in what is assumed about the outcome. Everything now turns on one question: was death ever confirmed? If death was certain, the resurrection explanation follows. If death was assumed but never firmly established, another explanation remains open. Up to this point, the investigation has remained inside the Gospel record. No outside theology has been introduced. No later doctrine has been imposed. Only what the texts themselves describe and what they leave unresolved. From those descriptions, two readings emerged. One assumes confirmed death, followed by resurrection. The other allows that death was assumed, but never conclusively established. The Gospel accounts describe an attempted execution, a body removed before sunset, and no public return. From the outside, death appeared complete. But appearance and confirmation are not the same thing. At this stage, the question becomes unavoidable. Is there any ancient source that addresses this uncertainty directly? There is one. The Qur'an does not retell the crucifixion. It does not reconstruct the scene. It addresses the conclusion drawn from it. It states that those who claimed they had killed or crucified Jesus were mistaken, not because no attempt was made, but because the conclusion of death was assumed rather than established. In other words, people believed Jesus was dead because they saw an execution attempt, saw the body removed, and saw no public return. That belief was understandable. But the Qur'an says it only appeared so to them, and that they did not possess certain knowledge. It explicitly contrasts assumption with certainty. This is not a retelling of events. It is a judgment about knowledge. It does not deny confrontation. It does not deny that events unfolded publicly. It denies that the killing was completed. The Gospel narratives themselves preserve traces of this early assumption. The disciples initially believe Jesus is dead and react in fear when they see him again. When Jesus shows his wounds, allows touch, and eats in their presence, that assumption is corrected. but only within a limited circle. Outside that circle, the original conclusion remains. The Qur'an names this condition directly. Those who differed about this event were themselves in doubt, lacking certain knowledge and following assumption. This mirrors what is visible in the Gospel record itself. The accounts differ in timing, sequence, witnesses, and final words. These differences are not later inventions. They are woven into the earliest accounts themselves. In this sense, the Qur'an's statement is not correcting the Gospel narrative. It is explaining why the narrative itself contains disagreement. The earliest record does not present a single resolved account. It preserves divergence. Only after this uncertainty is established does the Qur'an state its conclusion. What was presumed to be death was not completed. Jesus was raised by God, not as a return from confirmed death, but taken out of their reach before the killing was fulfilled. This also explains why there is no return to public life, no open resumption of teaching, and no moment in which the belief of death is publicly overturned. The disagreement, then, is not over the event itself, but over whether death was ever confirmed. At this point, the investigation is no longer about whether two religions disagree. It is about why certainty was declared, even though the earliest record still shows doubt. To answer that, the investigation must now turn to what happened after Jesus, and how one interpretation became dominant. By this point, two explanations stand side by side. One denies confirmed death and explains the aftermath as survival followed by withdrawal. The other requires death and interprets everything that follows as resurrection. The question now is not which explanation existed first. It is which one came to define the narrative. To answer that, the investigation must move beyond the events themselves and into what happened after Jesus was gone. The figure who changes the trajectory is Paul. Paul was not a follower of Jesus during his lifetime. He did not witness the crucifixion or see the empty tomb. He did not participate in the post-tomb encounters described in the Gospels. His authority comes later through claimed revelation rather than direct observation. His letters are the earliest surviving Christian writings. Paul's message introduces a decisive shift. For his theology to function, death must be certain, not assumed, not unclear, but established. If death remains uncertain, the theological structure cannot stand. Only a confirmed death allows the cross to become central. Only a confirmed death allows resurrection to become the core of salvation. This requirement reshapes how earlier events are understood. Ambiguity cannot remain at the center of a salvation message. What was once open to interpretation becomes fixed. Under this framework, alternative readings cannot remain equally valid. If death is uncertain, the theological structure cannot function as intended. This helps explain why details that raise questions are no longer treated as unresolved. Procedural gaps lose significance. Physical post-tomb encounters are interpreted within a theological framework rather than examined as historical uncertainty. This is not a claim of deception. It is a shift of priority. Paul is not preserving uncertainty. He is building coherence around certainty. By the time Christian doctrine takes its familiar shape, the question of death is no longer debated. It is treated as established. The Qur'an later rejects that certainty outright, not by denying the events described in the Gospels, but by denying that the conclusion of Jesus' death was ever definitively established. At this point, the investigation reaches its final stage. The task now is not to choose sides, but to reconstruct the sequence strictly from what is written, and no further. At this point, the investigation reaches its final stage. Not a declaration of belief, but a reconstruction of events based solely on what the Gospel record itself contains. If later theology is set aside and the records are followed step by step, a coherent sequence emerges. Jesus is arrested and publicly condemned. An attempt is made to execute him. Death is assumed quickly, but never conclusively established. A standard Roman procedure is not fully applied. The body is removed under pressure of time. Those responsible for the execution leave convinced the attempt succeeded, and that conviction is never publicly challenged. From their perspective, no further proof was required. An execution had been attempted. The body was gone. The teacher did not return. In the absence of public verification, death was not demonstrated. It was assumed. Afterward, Jesus is encountered alive, but only by a limited group. These encounters are physical, not visionary. They resolve fear for those who witness them, but they do not function as a public correction of the original assumption. There is no return to crowds, no resumption of open teaching, no public moment in which the belief that Jesus was killed is directly addressed or reversed. As a result, knowledge remains localized. Belief spreads, but verification does not. From this point, divergence begins. It first appears in the differing details preserved within the Gospel accounts. Differences in timing, sequence, witnesses, and reported words. Later, theology steps in to stabilize what history leaves open. One interpretation treats the assumption of death as fact and builds doctrine upon it. The other treats that original assumption as the point where misunderstanding began. When all elements are placed side by side, the rapid assumption of death, the procedural gaps, the post-event uncertainty, the limited disclosure, and the divergence of interpretation. One reconstruction requires us to affirm a completed death, despite unresolved evidence. The other requires only that the original conclusion was premature. The second reconstruction aligns more consistently with the sequence of events as recorded and introduces fewer tensions across the narrative. It does not require us to reinterpret physical encounters or reconcile conflicting timelines in order to defend a completed death. This is not a verdict of faith. It is a comparison of explanatory coherence. The Qur'an's account does not contradict the Gospel record. It explains how a mistaken conclusion could emerge from incomplete, hurried, and publicly uncorrected events. The Gospels preserve memory. Paul systematizes meaning. The Qur'an names the uncertainty and rejects the conclusion built upon it. For centuries, billions have inherited a conclusion before inheriting the question. They were taught what to believe, but rarely shown when the question stopped being asked. If certainty was declared before it was established, then re-examining the evidence is not rebellion. It is intellectual responsibility. Because truth does not collapse under examination. Only assumptions do. Every generation inherits answers. Only some are willing to examine the questions beneath them. If you value careful investigation grounded in evidence, support the work and help it reach those who are ready to ask.